background and a microphone will make its way to you. We record all the Q&As, so if you don't mind waiting until the microphone gets to you to ask the question, that would be amazing. I feel like there's a ton of possible places we could start with talking about the film. I guess I thought maybe we'd start with talking about genre. Over the past couple of films, you've almost been tackling these kind of classical cinematic genres and forms, and that continues with Gangsterism, obviously kind of the gangster picture, as is kind of said in the title. Also in some ways the film about filmmaking, which is maybe the most quintessential film genre in some ways. I'm curious kind of what attracted you in particular to the gangster picture, and what kind of using these forms kind of opens up and allows you to do.
Well, I think once you make enough movies, you're going to make the same movie again and again anyway. And to sort of accelerate the process of making the next movie, you could always reach for like an available genre, because you won't be able to do it. I think there's something about like in jazz or etc. Using standards, or here using like a classical genre. It allows you to like not do it. It allows me to, hey, I'm going to make a gangster picture. The last one was a heist one, before that was yada yada. And it allows you to sharpen your reflexes and your ideas of cinema, because you're going to be faced with this object that is somewhat external to you, right? Especially with the type of pictures I make. It's not like money's being thrown at me to make genre pictures, but it's a way for me to continuously relate my ideas back to the history of the forms and understand that placement. With the gangster picture in particular, I just grew up watching a lot of gangster movies. I always loved them. And I think they have a very interesting relationship to reality. Like there's this one I love, Paid in Full. And it's based on a true story. And the main character says, it's when they watched Scarface, they thought, oh, we should go sell drugs, right? And there's this very one-to-one relation to, you see something on screen and you give it a shot. A lot of my friends growing up to that type of situation, you see a picture, you should try that out. But I think that's really interesting. It's kind of like with rom-coms too. Rom-coms are like that. You see someone fall in love, like, oh, I should go on a date, you should try that out. So I think there's something really nice about this relationship between particular genres in cinema, and rather than you see something on cinema, oh, that's not my reality. Some of them you see it, like, it gives me permission to try things out, to try things out. So, but also Socrates was seen as a criminal, right? And he got in trouble for corrupting the youth and showing impiety to gods, because you hear some good philosophy, like, I should try that out. We should try to think that way, right? And I think that, so for the gangster genre in particular, it had this relationship to thinking that is very powerful. But also, all these things you don't usually see in pictures, it's just part of the gangster movie. Like dealing with money. There's a lot of movies you see people go on a date, let's say, you don't see him pay the bill. You just cut to them walking in the park. But I feel like there's something about how in a gangster movie, it's so part of what we're going to see. And when you're making movies, that's part of making movies too, having it or not having it. So I like the fact that it will allow me to think about that on the screen too. So that relationship to, but also to crime, and of course, right, and everything that's outside of legality, but also in creation. I always loved that quote as a kid, when Kubrick said an artist and a criminal share things in common, that they just can't accept reality. And that's really interesting to me too. So all these sort of relationships, but also in terms of like, if you watch a gangster movie, anyone could say anything they want. And I just want to say anything I felt like I wanted to say. And it's just part of the genre tradition. If Joe Pesci's in Goodfellas and he says something, okay, I guess he might say that. He's a gangster, right? Sure. But I just like this idea that, okay, if the characters ostensibly are involved in some sort of activity, then I could just rattle off on a bunch of ideas I have. I might say that, But maybe in a different genre, like, why would you say that? Here, it's like, well, he has a yellow gun. Maybe we might say that. So it's like this sort of different permission, kind of like back to the Socrates thing, right? Okay, he's already trying to be outside the stage, yada yada. He might just say a bunch of wild, out-of-pocket things that we just, I guess not really accept, but it's part of that sort of thing. So it gives you that permission to kind of mouth off. And I feel like as an experimental filmmaker or non-experimental filmmaker, at least in Canada especially, there's this idea you should just really be quiet and just, be grateful when a curator selects you and just continue on and say a bunch of nice things. So I just thought this is a way for me to play with that and think outside that for this movie. So Yeah, it agrees to all that. But like I said, how I started this answer, it's like when you watch a Howard Hawks movie, there's gonna be that, like you watch like Only Angels Have Wings. For some reason, Cary Grant's wearing like a cowboy hat and he's pointing around like he's a filmmaker, and all the big lights look like set lights, even though he's ostensibly like directing air traffic. And it's like no matter what I do, I'll probably make a movie what I did last year, you know. And that's why I've been trying to make movies fast, so I could just talk about what I did last year. And I would just pick a genre out of a hat. It's gonna be that type of struggle no matter what. Anyway, I think that a lot of filmmakers, especially in my generation, just seem to struggle with making the next movie. They get really into their head, like, oh, but this and that, and it takes 5 years for everyone, 6, 10 years, whatever, right? But I just want to I like this old-fashioned idea. I could just keep dropping movies, and yeah, I'll pick this one in the hat. No matter what, it's gonna be a movie by me. So, and the mystery to me is what it's gonna look like, what I'm gonna find out about myself. Because if I knew everything about myself, I wouldn't have to do this, you know. But this gives me places to find what it means to make a gangster movie, a rom-com. Like the rom-com will be very, you know, revealing probably because of the topic, right? But like, I'm just saying, every time I pick a genre, I could reveal something I would have revealed if I didn't, right? So I just think it's important for an artist to see themselves in relation to the history of forms that came before, because not to like simply abide by tradition, but to reinvent the traditions you're coming from because you exist. Just the way working with genre is this opposite thing. Working with genre reminds me I exist. You know, it's not like, oh, I chose genre and I forget who I am and make this gangster movie I don't really plan to. Choosing random genres, then I find again what it means for me to say I exist.
Here's, I mean, there's a lot of directions we could go from there, but one thing I was curious about in relation to language and how that operates within the gangster film, which you were just talking about, but also because I feel like the relation between language and cinema is something you've been wrestling with in basically all of your films. In some ways, this film, the language and dialogue is aphorisms, maxims, slogans at times. I think there's, I won't misquote it, I'll find it. But the quote that someone says that, Europe has memories, America has t-shirts. Yeah. And I think you just talked about Howard Hawks there with the Scarface thing. You have the world is yours in Howard Hawks' Scarface, in De Palma's Scarface, and then you have a Nas song that is the world is yours, and how these terms can proliferate. So I'm curious about kind of, particularly in this film, how you worked with language and how you see this kind of relationship between language and cinema.
Sure. I mean, just to start off, that quote about Europe having memories and America having t-shirts, it's from JLG by Godard. But I just thought on the other side, t-shirts have memories too. And that's why I wanted to show the Yeezy Gap shirt at the exact moment. Because I remember when that shirt dropped, I mean, obviously it's in the movie, but and then he declared himself a Nazi on Alex Jones, and so this idea that America only has t-shirts ignores the fact that these t-shirts have a production history. He's building factories in different places around the world. So it's a very old-fashioned idea of just thinking, America just have these t-shirts, right? There's a whole history in his relation to fascism and fascist aesthetics, etc. Right? So I want to use that in that moment and then show March's Yeezy Gap shirt, but also the gap in thinking and being yada yada. I could play with all his games. So it has that relationship to what's being said. It's never so plain. I think a lot of people misinterpret or just have these sort of claims about my relation to discourse as I'm saying these things and I just believe it's true. But in mathematics, you have axioms, and we'll find out by the end, if I hit a block or if I don't, right? But in mathematics, you could have these axioms, and you try to prove the opposite of the axiom, and if you hit a contradiction, then okay, the other thing's true. So this idea that it's so flat is false, just that simple example with the Yeezy Gap, and everything else happens, the fact it happens 3 times, etc. And each time it's like, because right after the Europe has memories, America has t-shirts, and he says a relation to logos that Europe ever had. Obviously, it's like a pun here with logos too, but also logos, obviously, and logic. And then we see the logos of the different apps on Clem's burner phone, which is different because it's not like Europe owns those apps, but who's going to collect that data, right? So it's all these other questions here. And yeah, and then obviously we have this blowout stuff. So yeah, it's all kind of like that. But this idea that just simple discursive claims misses the axiomatic relation to it and how that relates to how thinking is possible. Because a lot of people get into this idea that they just want to think a sort of pair-consistent logic, like P and non-P are the same at the same time. It's a very weak form of negation. Sometimes you have to say, this is P, this is non-P, and then take the risk to take that adventure in thought to find what happens. And that's why when I get critiqued about declarative questions or to declarative ideas in my films, it's actually just the opposite. It's how to take the biggest risk and see if we slip on the banana peel or not, right? And the fact you slipped on a banana peel, okay, it's not like I'm just simply endorsing the guy who slips on the banana peel. He's not looking around, right? So this type of thing, and I think that's really key to me, because when you're thinking with language in cinema, like we're talking about this thing about, oh, is it anti-colonial, yada yada. What I like about cinema is that it puts pressure on language, because language will be forced to describe something it hasn't seen yet, right? That's why great theorists like Godard and Eisenstein, they write a lot too, or at least they talk a lot. And it's because making images and sounds and frames and cuts forces you to describe it at one point. Like that's why Eisenstein writes it after it. Everyone who thinks theory is you write theory and then you make a film is trash. It's always the opposite. You know, you make your movies and then you write the theory after to think the next one, right? Eisenstein did that, right? But so I'm just saying, like, the relation to language and cinema, like language has to come after because it's smaller. We talk about there's different sizes of infinity, right? Language is just a smaller one. I'm not saying it's not infinite. I'm just saying things like painting, music, and mathematics and cinema, because it doesn't have to necessarily use language right away, I think it operates at a higher infinity. Because if I describe this room and there's like X amount of seats, there's like, it's black here, there's like these bulbs, blah, blah, I'm already dividing it, making it smaller and smaller and smaller, right? And to act like there is this sort of pre-discursive thing that just big one is also false. It actually misses the relationship between how large what exists is, right? So when I'm using language in the film, it's to play with this, not even necessarily tension, but this fight between how we see things, right? Because like, that example I like to use recently, it's like, you could see genocide on your phone, and then Jürgen Habermas could come out and say, oh, it's not a genocide. Language could come after and make a claim, right? So this fight of how to use frames and cuts and image and sounds to maybe make other declarations possible, other ways of thinking, but also to know that it cannot simply be reduced to what is said about it. And that's really important to me. But also, this last thing about declaration too, it's like, when you say I love you, it's a declaration. It's very risky. You don't know how it's gonna land, right? But you have to take declarative risks. It can't just be always these 20th century dialectics of just like everything's kind of true and making experimentations and it's endlessly deferred, all this type of stuff. I'm so deeply against it. But yeah, and also the thing with language too, it's like, because it's back and forth, as long as we still have this primacy for what you can't say immediately. Because like a lot of things in mathematics isn't immediately described in language. Like, you know, that whole thing with Ramanujan, and then like, oh, what is he describing? And later on, oh wait, this is actually describing a black hole. You know, and I just feel there's so many things you could do in thinking that cannot immediately be described to reduce it is dangerous. But I feel like we still have to somewhat include it, or else we get in a situation where, can we get like we shouldn't fear language either. But I'm just saying that there's a way for cinema to contain it, to include it without it being the largest part of our form of thinking. In the same way that there is a moment in philosophy where thinking and like being is related directly to language, right? And then mathematics interrupts that. And then Plato thinks, okay, there's other things that's not just language, right? Cinema could do something very similar in saying that, okay, language is included in the way we think about the world, but doesn't have to be the primary form of how we think truth and thinking. And I think there's something very intuitive about that with cinema, which I really love, that you could just see what's on screen and have some ideas about it. Maybe you can't even say it right away, you know. And yeah, so that's really key to me.
Because you mentioned the word pressure, and I was reading the interview you gave about this film in relation to, obviously, kind of the way we're talking about film at the moment and the way things are talked about and the sort of subjects that are talked about in the film and the way that dialogue is used. There could be, someone might make a film tackling some of the things that you're discussing in a very different way. They might be themselves the director delivering that as a voiceover, narrating something that's more kind of essayistic potentially, but you made the decision for it to be actors and to work with performance, and I don't remember the exact quote, but you felt that there's some kind of we're losing something of the tension between image and sound, and by working with actors there is some of that tension is kind of retained. But I'm curious about that and how you work with performance and why that tension's important.
Yeah, I think sure, I think what's really popular now, and a lot of young people like to do it, and some older people too, is that if you make a montage of all the found footage clips you can find, and then you can make some different statements over it. But I feel like the tension's being lost. There's a tension to have to call someone and say, okay, can you say these lines? And then we'll have to discuss it. We'll have a rehearsal and we discuss what that means or doesn't mean, or what that person's relationship to it is. And I think that's really important. I feel like, especially in, I like to make that distinction between mass art and social media, because mass and social are different, and so is art and media. But this idea that we're just one person speaking over everything else, I think it doesn't interest me in that same way. And I like this idea that by putting the ideas in relation to different actors performing, it allows me to re-encounter the idea. Like if someone else says it, I could hear it differently. But also, for example, there's a moment when I had the actors memorize the lines, and then I started cutting out a lot of lines too because I wanted to be more concise. And then some of the actors, like Charlotte and Khalil, said oh, actually, I like that one. Can we keep that one? I think that character. So that helped me because I feel like I would have already cut it. But the fact that they memorized the lines already, but they want to keep certain ones, okay, that's really good, we'll keep that. So that part of it is intriguing to me because it allows me to see the thought outside of myself and through these actors. And but also because I think a common thing in the 20th century is, oh, this isn't cinema, this is theater, blah, blah, this would be some sort of critique. But I feel like, obviously it's fine, it's not like I go to the theater a lot either, but I'm how many filmmakers in my generation just going to the theater all the time and having to encounter that idea? And then, I think what's a little more popular now is what is cinema's relation to internet, to video game, etc. Right? But I feel like I don't want to lose its relation to theater because, for example, during the pandemic, I couldn't shoot immediately, obviously. You had to have all this social distancing, yada, yada. And it made me realize that there's a level of abstraction happening here that I can't get through the screen. And there's this sort of thing where it's the difference between everything that's immediate and what's mediated. And people sometimes have a cheap idea that this lived experience is too immediate and not abstract enough. No, but this is very abstract, to be able to do this and talk to you and be over here. And I'm working with actors. There's a level of abstraction I can get to that I can't get if I'm just cutting a bunch of extant images or I'm just doing a zoo voice over it. There's this relationship to how non-immediate being in front of someone is. I go back to that example of love. It's because it's not immediate and you're in front of someone and you don't know what you're thinking, you have to rethink your thoughts. Because being face to face is meaningful in a different way. There's a level of abstraction there. Kind of like with Kuleshov, the whole classic Kuleshov effect. You see the face, you see the soup, and I guess that person's hungry, and then you cycle through different objects, right? Because it's a blankness to the face that is there in real life too, or immediate experience. So there's a lot of abstraction you could work with that it just wouldn't be available otherwise. And with all this stuff with AI prompts, and you have to write a little bit here, and then the image just appears. I just think that I like this idea that I have an idea, have images and sounds, write a little bit, and all of a sudden I can't just prompt the actor to do something. There'll be a minimal idea that person has. Then you could think something else too. And I feel like I can't lose that. That's really important. But in terms of preferring the actors, mostly just hang out and just talk about it so I know everyone knows what they're talking about. That's really important. And but Mark, for example, doesn't like to rehearse. We just kind of talk about what's the relationship with this person, that person, blah, blah. But he likes to just kind of be on fire when he gets there, and first takes really good type of stuff. So that's how that works, yeah. And it goes back to this question of language, because I feel like also we can't take for granted that people speaking on screen it is a given. The fact that sync sound, because obviously I don't always use sync sound. I don't always do that. So when someone's able to stand up with good posture and say something, I think that's really interesting. It doesn't even happen in life often. You know, a lot of us like, oh, pitter patter. So I feel like this idea, someone can actually like, I think this. It's really intriguing.
I think I could ask 1,000 more questions, but maybe we can open it up for questions. If you, sorry, I can't see, but if you raise your hand, the microphone will make its way to you.
Hi, thanks for that film. I just wanted to ask, I guess for the lack of a better word, in your process or in the conceptual, even the making stage, how do you know at any point, if you even consider it, how do you know at any point that you're not just replicating the same, whatever systems and ideologies that you might be alluding to critique? Like, how does that self-reflexive moment happen? Well, when, where, how, and how have you, if that's, or maybe that's not even considered at all, maybe, like, but how does that come to you? Like,
how do I know that I'm not repeating the world as it is? Is that kind of the question? Like, how do I know when I'm in the process? Like, at any given point, do I know, like, okay, I didn't just get on my hands and knees for capital at this exact moment, like that type of idea?
Yeah, I guess what I'm interested in is in the limits of irony. So at what point do you feel like that self-reflexiveness is in your hand, and at what point is it not? Does that ever happen?
Sure. I mean, I think the question is that, not to give this sort of like indefiniteness, but it's a risk. That's the thing too, right? Like the idea of self-reflexivity is also this idea that there's not just one. If there was just one, everything's great, and like, hey, I could just step back. But there's so many different forms of stepping back, and sometimes being reflexive means stepping in and taking a different type of risk. So, but like we try to do it at every level, whether how we use the budget, how we even like organize a set. Like there's always gonna be 2 hours for lunch, so the actors could really relax, and we could think about that. If the call sheet says we end at that time, we ended at the time, because I hate being on set. It says 4, you're at home at 10, these type of things. But like every moment we're making some sort of concerted effort to be consistent with our ideas, right? And this idea, like, how do you know if you're doing like the right thing, I guess, kind of, or if you're not like repeating the thing? Obviously, it's so you need like a concrete analysis with each point. But yeah, it's always to have that in your head. That's why directing has that situation where like you're thinking of 10,000 things, and you have to answer each actor or crew member, isn't that? But even then, like I felt like when I edited the film, like because I did a rewrite of this. For example, here's another example. I wrote the first draft of it in like 2022. I couldn't find a way to get money for it, so I made a different picture with a different thing and put that money towards this one. And then in 2023, I wrote the next draft in October 2023, and with world events at that time, I added different things into the screenplay to think about the present. I think it's always important to interact with the actual present you're living in. So that type of thing too, because I feel like a lot of filmmakers, they're making their idea and something happens in the world and they're like, well, that's not my movie, so I don't have to deal with that. But I like this idea that no matter what it is, if I have a way I could include it, I'll just try to include it. And whether we fail at including it or not, I'd rather give it an honest shot to think about it. Because like I could have just ignored whatever's going on and say, okay, we're still making this movie. And there's a lot of purists who would think that's the more artistic idea. But I'm against that. I feel like, you know, that whole thing with like filmmakers always saying, again, these kind of richer, more popular filmmakers, I don't want to make I don't want to make a movie in the present. I'm like seeing phones, all this type of stuff, and they just make a period film or whatever. I just feel like it's the opposite. I think it's really interesting. Anytime I could think of what's happening in the present, if I could just stuff it in the film somewhere, I want to do that. Because I think that's what lasts, actually, if that matters. I don't give a shit if things last, actually, because I'm not going to be here. You have to be in the present. But like when people talk about, like, say, like La Chinoise with Godard, I'm sure someone's like, yo, this Maoist stuff is gonna fall away. Don't bet everything on this, you know. But then it's because he was like, hey, no, 1966 and this was happening, blah blah. That's why we still watch it. And I think I rather make every possible error in trying to include what's going on in my world, because it's not like I go and think, oh, I was right about everything. And that's why even in the discussions between characters, people could watch and be like, oh, I think I side more with this person. I think it's right. Well, actually, no, I think school isn't exactly that. And you could have that. So I feel like part of it is also being robust enough to entertain, not just simply to go see both sides, but yeah, take every idea to its end and be willing to absolutely get it all wrong. I mean, that's why I like this idea of making movies fast, because you don't have time to be like, oh, but let's make sure our moral compass and political compass fits this and that. If you're making movies fast, you don't have time, actually, which is interesting, because I think adding the mistakes, kind of like what the character says, like when you look back at your old films, what you like is the tape and the glue that held it together. These are pieces of history too. So all my attempts, whether it works or not, to try to think the present, it has its own ethical, aesthetic, political value because I allow my unconscious in relation to it to appear to, rather than clean it up, right? So part of it is also just kind of, in terms of not replicating it, is this idea that, like, it's this idea, okay, there's another thing too, this idea that we can know when we are or aren't replicating it, ascribes a sense that it is a total system that we're trying to go against. But I think this idea that it's a totality in that sense is an illusion. It's not truly infinite like that. And if it was truly infinite like that, and we can't truly escape, then why do anything, right? It's because that there's not, like that thing I said earlier, there's not just one infinity, there's different sizes, infinite sizes. So maybe whatever system it is you're against has a particular size, but we can think a larger form and see it from that other side, or that other side too. So that too, so when we talk about a self-replication, we have to get rid of the idea of the one, that there's just this one big system that, okay, how can I not replicate? If there's only one, then of course you can replicate it. But if we let go of the structure that thinks in terms of oneness, and we think it maybe there's a bunch of infinite forms, some larger than others, and if you stand from the larger side, you can critique it from that angle, you know? Like, so that type of thing. Kind of like when there's a cut in a movie, as soon as the cut appears, you immediately recollect the frames you saw before mentally, right? So part of the risk of thinking is like producing these cuts, and in that cut, you start thinking, okay, these last X amount of frames were organized that way. And the idea, again, back against the one, you can't just have one form of cutting or one form of rupture. You have to continually re-rupture, recut, because the world isn't one, right? It's incomplete. If the world was complete, then you could just maybe make some final claim, right? But because it's incomplete, you're gonna have to continually do the fight anyway. So that's part of it too. That's how you get out of this idea of like, well, I replicate it, is just to continue on and know that neither the failure nor the victory will be a one. You know, there's not gonna be a final victory or a final failure, so you can continue.
Yeah. There, in front.
Thank you very much. I loved it. I discovered this week something I've been looking for, which was a Godard film made with his wife on YouTube, which lasts about 50 seconds, which is an advert for cigarettes, Parisienne cigarettes. Mm. And in that, he manages to fit in buffoonery, he manages to fit in a quote from a classic French drama from the 18th century, he has a German film clip and other stuff in there. And then the same day I came and saw the trailer for your film here. And I loved the trailer, and that's why I'm here. And then I came to the film and I thought that was the best trailer I've ever seen, because the film is incredibly like an evening-long version of the trailer. And that's not a critique at all.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm just wondering, how do you know when to stop? Why was it 86 minutes? Why was it not like Histoire du Cinéma under 4 hours? Or how do you know when to finish?
I don't know to finish. You know, it's like if you're ever baking, you know, you should never overproof anything. I think it's really important, you know, and you don't want things undercooked too. I was watching this baking show, and I found it really important to. I think to know exactly when to stop is like also when I start getting a lot of ideas near the end of something, I realize, wait a minute, I think, oh, maybe I should add these 10,000 ideas here, but that actually means, okay, that's the next film. So that helps too. There's a moment where it starts to not exhaust, but I realize, okay, that's the next one. But also, it just comes with the rewatch. Because what's funny about making a movie is that you never know it's the first time you saw your own movie until it's done. Because when you're editing and then you're getting closer to the end, and then you have to press the space bar to pause it. Oh, okay, I don't like that. You fix it, everything. But you know what, you do it again and again, and at one point you're like 40 minutes in, like, oh my gosh, I didn't even press pause yet. This might be it. And you keep. And at one point you'll watch it, and you realize, wait, that was the one. That was the first time, right? So you don't know it until you complete the thought. And I think for me to know when to stop relates to that. When I'm watching it, I'm like, oh, that's the thought. right? And it has to have that sort of lightness of that too. Because you never want to overproof it, or you want to be like, it's not like an academic paper. Like, I need more footnotes. This wasn't explained well enough. Like, maybe add one more voiceover there. That's stupid, right? You have to, in fact, just don't overproof it. Have a good bake. Those baking shows, they're like, time's up, and the person puts their hands up and they walk away from the bake. You gotta just, that's the bake, and you gotta walk away. If you like and then because other people get in a bad baking situation, added a lot of sprinkles, like get kind of worried how I made, just to trick them, add more sprinkles. You just gotta walk away from the bake. And I felt like with the trailer, I walked away from that bake, and then same thing with this one. And also I think you know when to stop, because there's ideas in it that you didn't come with before you made the movie. That wasn't in the script, that wasn't in the montage and everything. And then when the movie teaches me something that I wasn't knowing I was gonna make, that's exciting to me. And then when the movie taught me enough things that I wasn't planning to learn, then we could probably stop, Because I always love that thing about that Hamlet is smarter than Shakespeare. I always love that idea, I think the art we make should know more than we know. And at one point I'll watch my own thing and look, hey, this knows a bit more than me. I could stop. I don't have to, do that. So when I made this movie, I remember I watched it was like 7 a.m, and I didn't have to press pause. Like, oh, I think that's it. Then I went out, had a cigarette, just thought about it, and watched it again. Like, hey, I didn't have to press pause again. And then I watched a third time at the end. And and after that, you just have to let it go, because I feel like you could watch it 10 times. Oh, wait, actually this. No, okay, I have to make another movie, I'm going to die, so you gotta get to the next bake.
Yeah, question in front.
Hi. I was just interested in your sensory relationship with color in your films. I guess color is another language as well, similar to sound and painting, theatre, all the, further,
Oh, just in terms of what, like ideas, color? Okay.
I kind of felt that you worked with really rich color, which I rarely see in films. So
Yeah, I could talk about it.
yeah, thanks.
My producer Kelly Dong also did the color grade, and they're here with us too. But one of the things we talked about a lot with the color grade is that there's these movies there's some movies we really like in terms of what it looks like. We call them the acid Bergmans, and there's one called After the Rehearsal, and there's one called Passion of Anna. And it has this really interesting grain structure, it's always dancing, the colors, And we wanted to have that, and there's a couple other films, but those are really key. Also because a lot of filmmakers today are getting way too professional. Everything has this deep shadow. Everyone wants to become David Fincher or something. And I just think there should be a different way to play with color. We're in digital, we should really, when we move away from film and everyone misses the grain and everything. When we get away from digital, whatever, we're gonna miss a certain type of digital grain, and I want to enjoy it, So I want to have at every moment, even if it's a still shot, I want to see the dance of the color and the grain structure, because it also relates to the cuts hit harder because in a sort of geometric way, it's sharper. The cut feels sharper because there's so much going on in the image. So when you have the next one, there's more of it to oppose in some way. And also I got really into painting, and because I couldn't make movies at one point because of the pandemic, so I need to do something. But I also loved how Milton Avery didn't always paint everyone's skin color. There'd be someone painted purple or blue. And I think there's something interesting, especially a movie about race and racism, to not always have natural skin tones, whatever that may mean, but allow the skin tones to play with the digital textures, to play with this idea, because if you have that on someone's face and it's kind of dancing like that, you might kind of derive this idea that racism is real, but race isn't. And I want to think about that in terms of okay, you could see all that, and we could think that in relation to all these other ideas about race in it too. But also, I just think in terms of beauty, I just like colors that pop. I think that's not a crime. I don't like to see that. I don't see too many colors that pop because everyone's trying to be very serious with too many shadows, and it's just, you know, teal and orange or whatever is going on with young filmmakers today. I don't know. So that's really important to see that, to have that, relation to color. And the fact that, like, just like everything else that's interesting in cinema, it's more intriguing when it's not what my eyes look like. You know, when things are desynchronized, when colors look a totally different way. That's what's nice about interacting with this almost the same materials that my sense experience can have, but radically reorganized. And I think color is something that helps me think that. But also with the colors of, say, the costumes and everything, it allows me to cut. If I know there's gonna be a red tie and the next shot has like a red tape, and then like, it allows me to make associations. Because the key of any type of thinking is these associations you don't expect to make. And if I have these sort of bold colors, I'll just connect things I wouldn't connect consciously, but just because, okay, this yellow tape looks like this yellow gun, and then there's this thing talking about the yellow man, and there's also stuff with this yellow block. It allows you to make different associations that are not available in that thing in itself. Color is like an index of the contingency by which things appear. Color just reminds you everything's contingent, actually, which is wonderful. We've got to remind ourselves a bit more. But yeah, I just think that's helpful because so much of thinking is just finding two things, like being and thinking or whatever, two things that have a similar shape. And when things are similar enough, you go, okay, I think it's the same. And you just make an axiom and just follow the consequences. So having really sharp colors in a movie allows me, when I'm making my montage, oh, these shapes or these colors are the same. And I wouldn't have noticed that if we didn't have this really radical color grade. And it allows you to make associations. So anything that would help me make an association I wouldn't make on my own. Because then I get back to this language stuff. If we just have linguistic categories to organize your reality, it's a very impoverished way to see things. But even things like color, suddenly I could make a leap between, because like there's that yellow block toy. It was there on set, so I used it, and then it rhymed with the yellow Lenin, this and that. But you know, if that was a blue Lenin and a green yellow toy, I mean, I wouldn't think it's an interesting cut. So these colors allow you to take these contingent chances in the risk of the montage, because that's the part you can't predict in advance. Right, but it's only when a filmmaker can like incorporate all these contingencies that you get that feeling, that texture of being alive. Because being alive contains contingency, right? It's like that joke that Jean Renoir said that like you have to. Bertolucci quotes a lot. It's like you have a set, right? You have to keep one door open just so something random can come in. And I feel like color is one of those things.
We've got time for one more. Just one more. Yeah, just down here at the front.
Hi. I was surprised that actually you talked about it quite a lot already, but I was thinking throughout the film there are these, I think, 3 or 4 moments of a hug that really stuck with me because of they felt very ambiguous in a lot of ways, kind of loaded with conciliatory feelings, maybe de-escalation, but also a lot of really genuine affection. And so you're speaking about rom-coms and about the phrase of "I love you" as this kind of logical risk, and I guess I wanted to hear more about what you thought about this presence of love in politics and in art, but because increasingly you see like this kind of claim of like, you know, love is all we have, and it almost is meant to be like materialist because it's kind of referring to the kind of a universality that is accessible, but at the same time that makes me personally very uncertain about. It makes me want to distrust it immediately, even though it's a very, you know, natural thing. So yeah, I guess I wanted to ask what you thought about love.
What I thought about love. I think, obviously, there's very different tensions within it, right? Like we talked about Griffith, and Intolerance has that weird subtitle like "Love Struggle Through the Ages," right? And so, and like Harmony Korine's Aggro Drift, I think, ends with like, you know, love everyone. You know, it's like, I think we should always be suspicious when certain people say like, oh, you know, just love, right? And I think kind of what you're saying, but I feel like obviously I think love is a crucial part of being alive. But I feel like it's in these sort of kind of like what in the previous question about how do you know you're not replicating the world and everything. It's about getting out of this idea of the one, right? If you reduce all ideas of how to solve the world to a one, which is love, then actually we could see behind that mask. So when like Griffith says like, oh, just love, and intolerance, it sounds like it was love, we know this is like a cop-out. And same thing with the agrodrift picture or whatever. So I feel like I could have a better trust in relation to this idea of thinking how love could be concretely in our world when it is thought with other things too, right? Because we don't love in the void, unfortunately. Or fortunately, actually. No, love would be worse if we're just loving in the void, okay? Because like, love is interesting because you're a concrete historical person in real history. And through these contingencies of what we're living, you might actually meet someone, right? Or have some camaraderie with another person. But that also means that we're concretely in a world where there is real politics, right? There is art. But it's also science, like when Buddy talks about his procedures, which is really interesting to me. So I think when I think the way love could be something liberatory, it has to see itself in relation to those other things, like science, art, and politics. Or else it just becomes like a fake, empty statement that you see in the agrodrift or the D.W. Griffith picture. But I think it's also important just because it, like, you could think of it as a very generic form for how thinking is possible, right? You just kind of wander about, you don't think anything ever happen to you. And then it happens to you, like you specifically, historically in this world, and then you have to like take that risk of thought, okay, I think I'm in love, I'm gonna tell this person. And then you start, building your life together or not, and nothing is set in advance. Does that mean like, oh, we're exclusive? Or it doesn't mean that. Or it means we move in together, or we don't. And each thing is open to history, what the concrete construction of a love means there, right? So its very form is the form of how thinking happens. You don't know in advance. It's pure risk. And yet, if it succeeds, it's not a permanent succession. You have to continuously rethink what that means to love this other person or a set of people, etc. And you construct it over time, right? But the same thing when you create a new artistic form, this idea hits you, and you're like, should I trust that one? And then you trust it, and and by choosing that form of cutting, that form of framing, it opens up new forms of framing and cutting that wouldn't have been available to you if you didn't take that initial risk of trusting that form of cutting that almost felt accidental, or felt like, oh, this looks kind of, I don't know if this is even beautiful right now, blah, blah, but then you realize it's something else. And same thing with politics. You have to really think, okay, I think we are equal, and what consequences come out of that, right? So I think the importance of thinking love in relation to the rest of your historical life is that it's such an easily accessible idea of what thinking looks like. And you don't necessarily need a book right away or a movie, but but also has all this ideology around it, because everyone has a nice little phrase about love they could tell you. But what I like about it is that how accessible it is in terms of like, everyone has an opinion and an idea about it, I feel like some of the other ones, maybe like politics and science and art, people might try to chastise you and say, "Ooh, I have a PhD, I can tell you this, blah, blah." But like, you can't kind of look for someone with a PhD to tell you about love. You might have to really think about it concretely in the world, There's no experts. That's the thing, there's no experts. And I feel like the lack of expertise in love, but is aligned with the fact why we know it's infinite, because you could talk to someone that's completely unschooled and might tell you something really empowering about why love is important in someone's life, And I just think like kind of back to the Platonic idea that like a philosopher who doesn't know love doesn't know how to philosophize. And I think it's really true, especially when there's so many pathetic academic philosophers who probably have no love in their lives making claims about the footnotes. No, I'm dead serious. There's life beyond the footnotes. We have to really concretely be in the world, and what it means to love, what it means to be equal, what it means to make a new scientific form or artistic form. And I just think there's something so beautifully egalitarian about love, because we all know what it means to encounter someone or not encounter someone, and how chance could affect our vision of the world.
Thank you, Isaiah. Thank you for the film. Thank you all for coming. A retrospective of Isaiah's films will continue tomorrow with a short film programme and this debut feature 8888, so hopefully we'll see a lot of you again tomorrow. But with that, get home safely, and thank you for coming.